Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Chicanery. As per usual, it is your host. I am Danny, and we have JT.
Hello again.
And we are back. It is an F1 race recap. Either we're so back or it's so over. I guess it depends on sort of what side of the fence you fall on and your enjoyment of F1 to sort of dictate how you feel about that. But it was the Bahrain Grand Prix this past Saturday, annoyingly. And there is a surprising amount to get through. So I guess, well, without any further ado, let's get started. But first, a word from our sponsor, Homefield Apparel. Homefield has entered the thrilling world of motorsports with the Hendrick Motorsport Collection, which is available to pre-order now. Based out of Indianapolis, you likely already know Homefield for their high-quality, officially licensed collegiate apparel. You probably also know that they have more than 180 schools on their roster, so there's a little something for everyone. I mean, seriously, they even have my local Division II school, Wayne State University. Given Homefield's storied legacy in throwback college apparel and their relentless commitment to quality, moving to racing apparel seemed like the next logical step, and that's reaffirmed in their meticulous approach to designing the Hendrick Motorsport Collection. Iconic logos, legendary drivers, and unforgettable moments, this collection is a celebration of the golden era of NASCAR. Here at Victory Lane Vibes, we're super excited to get our hands on what Homefield has cooked up. Their collegiate wear is second to none, and in concert with some of the most legendary drivers and one of the most legendary teams in NASCAR history, the Hendrick Motorsports Collection is a banger. To learn more, visit www.homefieldapparel.com. Their online storefront is easy and convenient to navigate, making it that much easier for you to proudly represent your favorite drivers and relive NASCAR's glory days. And be sure to use promo code VLV24 for 15% off at checkout on your first order. Again, the Hendrick Motorsport Collection is available to pre-order now. Use promo code VLV24 for 15% off at checkout on your first order. And thanks again to Homefield Apparel for supporting this podcast. And so I guess, well, let's move into free practice, kind of the logical place to start. Sort of the free practice sessions were much like preseason testing, were a bit of a jumble. We didn't get a really good look at where what the sort of competitive picking order was going to be with preseason testing. It was kind of all over shot. Free practice 1, the very snappily named Visa Cash App RB team actually topped the session with McLaren running very close behind. Then, of course, free practice 2, Lewis went to the top of the timesheet and gave everybody perhaps a little bit too much hopium there. And then it was sort of Ferrari and Red Bull that rounded out the top of the timesheet in FP3 with Leclerc, I do believe, being quickest in that one. Now, and of course, with some benefit of hindsight, the FP3 was probably the most informative, given that would, of course, you flip around a few things, that would give us probably the closest sign of what the qualifying order and thusly sort of the competitive running order was going to be. With Mercedes kind of falling down the order a bit and being jumbled in roughly with the pace of Fernando and the two McLarens. But the big thing that really should have been sounding the alarms was Alpine and their just stunning lack of pace across all 3 sections. Ocon and Gasly occupied the bottom 4 positions. The highest that they ever got was Gasly placing, large air quotes here, 16th in FP2, which is dismal, suffice it to say. And then that actually quite neatly shuffles us off into qualifying, because Alpine qualified dead last, 19th and 20th, which is really, really bad.
And I wasn't too shocked that was going to end up happening. I figured just like based off of stuff I was reading about them, like throughout the week before the GP even happened, it seemed like they were just like completely struggling with whatever. I mean, even I think maybe on Thursday or something, they were saying that they were losing a ton of time. I think they might have even had some issues with their car overheating or something like that. I don't remember if that's actually true or not, but I remember just like a ton of issues, and I'm like, yeah, it's just abandoned all hope for this team, unfortunately.
Yeah, and that's well, you are absolutely correct. Alpine had they had started to sound the alarms, yes, in preseason testing, that they were concerned that they weren't going to have the pace, so on and so forth. And I mean, and it's easy to kind of dismiss that stuff as, being pessimistic. I mean, how many years did we sit through of Mercedes going, "Oh, I don't know, looks like the competition has caught up this year," to then, Death Star the field, at Bahrain and Australia, and basically carry that through the whole rest of the season. So, you know, granted, Alpine is a slightly different case. That's not quite apples to apples, because they have been overfunded and underperforming for the last really since they became the works team again. So I don't know, was that 2016, 2017, whatever that was. So quite a while, I guess is my point. But yeah, it's bad. I mean, so much so that actually this morning they have effectively completely scrapped their whole like senior technical staff and are going with a kind of three-pronged approach that McLaren adopted. Sorry, last year after their car was also a dog in preseason and the first couple races of the year. And to be fair, that turned out for them pretty well. So there may be hope for those weirdos in Depe yet, but yeah, it is genuinely almost staggering how bad this car is. Um, it's just so silly. And I don't know, maybe there'll need to be a section just devoted to how slow were the Alpines after every Grand Prix because, well, that's funny. But
I don't know, maybe all of their resources, they decided to pool all their resources into their hypercar program and just left F1 to be scraps.
which, you know what, to be fair, if that was the case, I wouldn't actually be particularly mad at that. To be
They did
fair,
a lot better at in Qatar with their hypercars than they did the whole entire F1 weekend and preseason testing combined. So
yeah, exactly. I was just about to say, yeah, they actually didn't do half bad at the WEC season opener. So yeah, I mean, if something to that, but in that point, just fold the F1 team. Like I said, I mean, they've been struggling for a while, so I don't know. Maybe this is a convenient excuse. We'll see. But sort of next up on the list of slowpokes, granted they didn't earn the wooden spoon the way Alpine did, but was Sauber. I can't be bothered to remember which name they're using, if it's steak or kick. So we'll just say Sauber. And they were also out Q1 bottom of the barrel, which was a little bit of a surprise for me, given that Sauber is traditionally actually fairly strong at the first round of the season. They usually qualify near the top 10, and there was just they didn't have anything in qualifying. Now the caveat to that being, and we'll get to this in a second, their race pace was quite a bit better than initial quali led on. But yeah, they were slow, and sort of rounding out, well, frankly, the usual suspects was Logan Sargeant was out in Q1. He was, I don't know, P16, I think is where he ended up qualifying. Actually, no, I'm sorry. He was actually P18. He was just ahead of the Alpine, but actually behind the Saubers. Um, I know he was grumbling about traffic, and if you watch the quali broadcast, there was quite a bit of pit lane silliness to open up, even though there actually was a directive that had been introduced into sporting regulations that said the longest line was not allowed. Teams said, you know, we would be real upset if we knew how to read and did it anyway. But that sort of rounds that off. And then Q2 was pretty quiet, sort of business as usual. Leclerc was fastest in Q2. Mercedes waited a really, really long time to set any time at all. I mean, it was like they were on their outlap basically as the session was coming, flying lap, sorry, as the session was coming to an end. And that was, of course, enough to get them through to Q3. George finished the session, sorry. Tongue twister there. P2, and Lewis was like P7 or thereabouts. Magnussen was knocked out. He ended up starting P13. And that was really about all she wrote for that. But Q1 Q3, sorry, was in some ways the most interesting. Verstappen pole. Piastri noted, he said that, Friday would be the day where we see, just how many sandbags come off the Red Bull. And I'm paraphrasing a bit there. And he was not wrong. Verstappen pole. Leclerc was a little over 2/10 behind. It was like 215 thereabouts thousandths is what he was off. Russell qualified P3. Both McLarens made Q3 and ended up starting 7th and 8th. And Hulkenberg made Q3. He rolled off P10, which is cool. It's, funny enough, we talk about teams sounding the alarms. Hassett talked about potentially being way, way, way off the pace. And they really weren't. I don't know Hulk dragged the previous car to Q3 a couple of times, but this felt way more solid a Q3 appearance. I mean, he was qualifying in and around the top 10 all day or all morning on Friday. So this is, I don't know. This year's Haas, I don't think is going to suck. And in my opinion, if this is indicative of the form, at least the early season form that Haas is going to have, Haas might look kind of stupid for letting Gunter Steiner go. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, personally, I feel like Gunther Steiner was basically just a fall person. Like, I don't think any of the issues with Haas necessarily can be solely attributed to him, just one person. I mean, I think we kind of said it last time, but it's just like most of the problem with Haas is that they just haven't developed their car that much. It's severely underdeveloped, and they really felt, or at least Gene Haas has basically said that it's not worth their time to develop the car anymore. So, I mean, like, I don't know. They could look silly, but at the same time, I'm like, I mean, if they end up doing well, good for them. I mean, it'd be a nice change of scenery from how they've been doing the past couple of years, honestly.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and it's worth noting that this could be a bit of a false dawn. Traditionally, Haas is kind of strong early in the season, and then it kind of tails off. They put all their eggs in the basket of one upgrade package, which usually doesn't work, and then they slip further to the back of the field, and that's kind of how it goes. But like I said, certainly I had a look at a few previous early season qualifying appearances. And like I said, this is the most strong of a Q3 appearance I think this team has had in a little while, actually. So I am cautiously optimistic. But I don't know. We could.
I mean, time will tell whether or not this was a fluke or if it's actually legit.
Yeah, exactly. And that was just what I was about to get to. Is we'll see. Certainly in the next few weeks, we'll get a better sense for true competitive running order and who's quick at what types of circuits, blah, blah, yada, yada. But speaking of which, kind of getting into the race, I mean, okay, it was a Red Bull 1-2. Again. Max.
Nobody saw that coming at all.
Yeah, well, I tweeted from the pod account, my excitement for the season, preseason testing, new car launch season. excited just for a crushing, and I mean that both in the competitive sense and in the emotional sense, Max Verstappen victory. 22 seconds over Checo, who, as per usual, should probably be shipped off to F4 because he only qualified P5 and had to really work at it to even get the second place. I talk about sort of unknown running orders. Unfortunately, Hulk got caught up in a lap one, turn one melee. Stroll and Hulkenberg got together, and then Bottas just kind of RKOs out of nowhere and collects the pair of them. It was a very, very clumsy incident. One that I'm still not entirely sure how it happened. And when I say not entirely sure how it happened, I mostly mean how Bottas didn't see the Aston Martin and the Haas effectively stuck together and then forgot how to brake. I don't know. It was very weird, very clumsy. But this is the first Bahrain in like 10 years, actually, where there were no retirements. Usually there's at least one, and especially as it's, sort of traded blows with Albert Park for being the season opener. But yeah, just nothing this year, which was more than a little surprising. Like I said, I just figured somebody somewhere would break. Now funny enough, talking about Bottas, he had like a 52-second stop because a wheel nut got stuck, which was kind of funny. But that was, and there were some issues, and we'll kind of get to this because there is a long list of cars that had some issue of some description. But yeah, it was fairly uneventful. Not really much in the way of wheel-to-wheel scrapping. Checo and Leclerc fought for a bit. Leclerc and Sainz, Sainz, he's going to be out of a drive for 2025 at this moment. So he's just kind of showing up and showing out right now. He's like, who wants my services? And so he ran Leclerc very hard throughout periods of the race, and it was genuinely very fun to watch. I know Leclerc would have liked anything other than, as he, again, we'll get to it in a minute, he had some brake issues, but yeah, it was, like I said, otherwise fairly uneventful until we get to the last about 10 laps. The VCARB drivers, there were some fireworks that went on there. It was less than 10 laps to go. Yuki was battling Magnussen, who was on completely toast sauce, and got team ordered. And Yuki was very, very angry about it. And he, so much so that he voiced his, conveyed rather, his displeasure with the whole thing and dive bombed Daniel Ricciardo at turn 8 on the cooldown lap, to which Danny Rick over the radio called him, and I quote, a fucking helmet. Which, I guess that's fair enough. But that was super gross. Because Ricciardo didn't have the pace either. Yuki had well and truly had the measure on Danny Rick all weekend. And then to get team ordered at the last possible second, which didn't end up doing anything. It just slowed the two V-CARB drivers down and allowed Magnussen to consolidate P12, which is still not points, it's worth noting. So, yeah, I don't know what that's about. And I understand Yuki's frustration, but I also think that was not the right way to do it. Yuki has taken quite a bit of flack throughout his career for driving a bit angry. A lot of people feeling like that is a detriment. And this was just the ultimate ammunition for that, what he did on the cooldown lap. Granted, we don't know what happens within the halls of Faenza and to a lesser extent the mothership in Austria. So, I don't know, maybe this was purposely a very public display, but it seems, certainly from an optics perspective, and mainly an optics perspective towards Yuki, it seems just ill-advised. That is certainly not something I would have done in that situation. I don't know if you have any particularly strong thoughts or feelings, but I was actually genuinely a bit shocked to watch that on that watch that footage back on Twitter a little later.
I mean, I don't really have any strong thoughts or feelings on it one way or the other. I mean, I saw a bunch of people talking about it on Twitter and stuff and voicing their opinions, mainly saying that they didn't really like it or whatever. But honestly, like, to me, I'm kind of like, I don't know. I don't really care, mainly because I don't know.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, like I said, as most pundits, both wannabe and legitimate, I class myself very much in the former category. Yeah, weren't really all that gassed about it. Because again, it was
It's just so
again.
minor and like kind of minute. Like,
Mhm.
okay, yeah, it was stupid, but nothing really happened from it. I mean, they didn't collide. So, I mean, it might have been a bigger deal if they did have contact of some sort, but because that didn't happen, it's kind of just like, oh well, it's just a random thing that happened.
Yeah, I guess the bigger thing, and maybe this is, since the first race was such a snoozer, maybe that I'm already getting caught up on the storylines, kind of future implications. Because Yuki, granted he's played his cards kind of cool, but certainly the grumblings from within Team Faenza is that Yuki is kind of eyeing up the second Red Bull seat, because it is widely thought that Checo is gonna probably get the can after this year, and excuse me, and that this kind of behavior doesn't really mesh well with aspirations of a proper Red Bull drive. Now, let me be clear, I don't think Danny Rick deserves it either. Certainly, he has not shown me anything that even remotely suggests, well, frankly, that he should have been let back into F1 at all, let alone a proper Red Bull drive. But that's,
See, I was gonna say that, but I'm like, I know people really, really like Danny Rick, and I'm just like, I just kind of don't know if I want to open that can of worms because I know people feel very strongly about him. I mean, I get it. Like, I don't have any, like, he's pretty good when it comes to like marketing the sport and like, getting F1 like meshed in with like pop culture and stuff like that, just because he's very personable. He's kind of goofy, clowns around and stuff like that. And that works. But as far as it goes for his driving, I don't know. I'm just not that convinced.
yeah, and I was just about to say, I am more than happy to open that can of worms because I just do not care. Um, but but yeah, and that's the thing, Danny Rick as a dude, like I think seems like he's a pretty cool dude. Yeah, he's funny, he's kind of goofy, and it is massively endearing. Um, but certainly the post first Red Bull stint, those years have just not been kind. I mean, he didn't really have a great time when he was at Renault. Again, when we've talked about this on previous podcasts before, I understand why he felt the need to extricate himself from the Red Bull system, because it was very clear that team was swinging in Max's direction, and he felt like he wasn't getting the support that he needed, and like that's understandable, totally fair. But he didn't do a good job, particularly didn't have a great go of it at Renault. Then he buggered off for McLaren, and that went even worse, to the point where, of course, he gets replaced by Piastri, just to then basically find himself in the place where he started his career. His stock has taken a real hit over these last, I guess at this point, about 5, 6 years. And to some extent, Danny's got no one to blame but himself for that. Now certainly, I guess we'll see going forward. if maybe he can get the measure of Yuki, but the races he ran last year did not suggest that.
I
And
mean, I guess the races he ran last year up until the point where he got hurt from that incident at Zandvoort. But I don't know. Personally, if I was in charge, I would have been done with him, kicked him to the curb, and put Lawson in because clearly Lawson is a lot more capable. Yuki probably maybe let him stay a little bit longer, but if things don't seem like they're improving, just kind of plateauing off, then personally maybe start looking for somebody else as well. But I don't know. Personally, I thought it was kind of I still call the team AlphaTauri because Racing Bulls just kind of it's just whack. But personally, I thought that was just kind of a waste of their time to keep waffling around with Ricardo when it's like you have Lawson. Like, what are you doing?
yeah, I completely agree with you. I thought after the performances that Lawson put in last year that he would be a shoo-in for that seat, and then Ricardo comes back. I'm like, but why? I still don't really understand the rationale. Maybe
I don't even really know what's been going on with AlphaTauri, period, and like some of the decisions that they make because even them putting DeVries in kind of didn't make a whole lot of sense. And then putting him in and then stacking him mid-season, and it's just like to me, it's just like a whole mess. I mean, part of that was who was to blame for that was really Helmut Marko because he's just a moron. But I don't know, some of their decisions just kind of don't make a whole lot of logical sense.
no, I completely agree. Yeah, Helmet being a helmet was responsible for the failed DeVries experiment. And I mean, you say mid-season, that's being kind. I mean, it was, it was like, what, 22, 23 race calendar last year? Nick got 10. So, basic arithmetic says that that's not even halfway before he got the can, which is wild. But, but yeah, no, I would have put Lawson in that seat permanently. But like I said, maybe they're trying to give him a full season, figure it out. But certainly the result, the P13, I think it was that Ricardo had, P13 with Sonoda being P14. I certainly know that if you look, just look at the stat sheet, you'll go, oh well, Ricardo was quicker. He beat him in the race. Yeah, no, that doesn't tell the tale of what really happened with that. And that was just a bit of scummy, underhanded team orders. Like, I don't even think Ferrari in the early 2000s would have done something so shameless, honestly. And I mean, and that was the top Braun Schumacher days, and they were pretty shameless and ruthless. But moving on, kind of moving up the order. Zhou Guanyu nabbed P11. As I had alluded to, certain the Saubers, these name changes are absolutely atrocious, and it's really breaking my brain. Um, uh, yeah, the Saubers started pretty far down the back of the grid, and Zhou Guanyu went on an alternate tire strategy, and to some extent, so did Bottas after collecting a Haas and a Aston Martin. And for Zhou, it almost ended up in points. It was P11. Which is very close, and is a far cry from the P17, I do believe it was, that he qualified at. So, genuinely impressive. Russell was third or fourth. Lewis was like eighth or ninth. Then also the McLarens were, because Piastri was just up the road. Yeah, Lewis was ninth because Piastri was just up the road in eighth, and Norris was like seventh. So, generally speaking, kind of for the top teams about where we ended up, I guess the one biggest surprise was the relative lack of pace of Aston Martin. They came out the gates hot last year, and Fernando finished P9, and I think Stroll was P13, which, granted, Ferrari and Mercedes were tripping over themselves a little bit at the start of the season, which, when we've talked about it, we talked about it in the season recap, that created a little bit of a performance vacuum, if you will, that Aston Martin was able to fill. But it was, a little surprising. I thought that they would sort of build on the pace that they had found in the second half of last year, and they have not capitalized on that, at all. So just a curiosity. Don't know if that's worth sounding the alarms on yet, but could be a bit of a wake-up call for Aston Martin that they have potentially goofed it in the offseason. But speaking of goofing it, we have certainly a number of teams who have definitely made some errors, at least some early teething issues. First, to start out and arguably the biggest talking point of the race, Mercedes with power unit issues. Both Lewis and George were having battery issues. George, it was temperature related, and Lewis, he just couldn't get the thing to recharge at all, which is wild because the Mercedes power units are usually pretty faultless, even if the rest of the car is a dog. And that, at least right now, is not the case. So that's interesting to me. And Williams, who is a Mercedes customer, was also having some issues. Logan Sargeant was reporting some issues, as was Alex Albon. We're both having some temperature issues. So I don't know. This feels ominous to me.
I can't say, because honestly, it's just one race. So, I mean, sure, it could turn out that the Mercedes power units are complete dog and are just going to spontaneously combust or not charge or whatever. I mean, time will tell.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's just one race. Like I said, certainly Mercedes reliability, barring some kind of isolated incidents, is usually pretty stellar at the start of the season. So that was why it certainly why it caught my attention. We'll have to see next week, but my brain is already is recalling to the Ferrari in 22, where the thing just blew up every week. And then so they had to turn the wick down on power to get it to survive a race distance. But moving on, Logan Sargeant was having some steering wheel issues, which was very funny because Williams made great hay about how they're finally moving away from the chassis mounted dashboards, and they're moving it on the steering wheel. Lighter, it's simpler, frees up space, it's more better. And then in the first race of the season, it breaks, which is just, I think that is hugely poetic and kind of ironic. But moving back to Mercedes, Lewis's seat broke about halfway through the race. And if you haven't watched footage of his post-race interview about that, like on Twitter or wherever, you really should, because it's really funny. But he goes on to describe in almost horrifying detail the seat breaking, and talking about, I do believe it was his left butt cheek hanging in the air, and those were his words, not mine. And he's just laughing about it the whole time. I know, we've talked about it. I spent an episode, well, actually, I spent, 2 episodes of talking about the move. Lewis is, going, unflustered, unbothered into his final year at Mercedes. Homeboy is very clearly ready to leave. And so to see him just chop it up with reporters about the seat failure is just kind of funny, and I don't know, in some ways probably indicative of Lewis's mentality going through the season. Dare I say it, but I think he might have checked out already. um, but that just compounds Lewis's no good for nothing rotten day. It makes it all the more amazing that he was able to score points in all of this. Leclerc struggled mightily with braking issues, more specifically, braking force not being evenly distributed across the front axle. Apparently, it was something up to 100 pounds of force difference between the front wheels, which is insanity. And it's amazing that he only locked up a couple of times in through that kind of fiddly section. I guess that's like turns 3, 4. It's like a chicane on steroids. But yeah, that he only locked it up a few times there as opposed to like straight up understeering off the circuit. Because that is, again, that's huge. And then we've talked about it already a little bit, but yeah, the Alpine, I say car issues. The Alpine's just slow. The issue in this case is the whole car, which is kind of wild to me that they've buffed it this badly. And much I talked before, particularly technical director Matt Harman and head of aero Dirk they had reportedly tendered their resignation even before the start of the race, which is kind of wild, with Alpine announcing this morning, that they were completely scrapping the whole existing technical structure with a sort of design by committee, effectively, which I realize it's not being super charitable, but like I said, it's just, three heads are better than one, ostensibly. So we'll see what happens there, but I think in post, I'm gonna for next week, if Alpine is still slow, I'm gonna record something that is how bad was Alpine, but it's gonna be in the cadence of where's that Pokemon, I think. Because I think that would be kind of funny, and it can be a recurring bit for a couple of weeks, or at least until they figure out the car. So we'll see, but yeah, so that sort of rounds out the Bahrain weekend. Not like I said, a less eventful Bahrain than we've had in years prior, or I guess just broadly speaking, season opener, because there've been some kind of silly things with the COVID years, but yeah, no, not super exciting. No cars, no Ocon gets 30 seconds worth of penalties and punted into oblivion. But then again, they were too slow, so I guess stewards didn't care. But that is good because this is another week where F1 has absolutely blown the lid off things with the news cycle. So we'll start with the easy bit before we really dig into the meat. But race interference by Mohammed bin Sulayem. And I guess I really shouldn't be surprised. He's a smarmy bastard who very much he is extraordinarily self-serving. He makes Jean-Marie Balestre seem like competent and ethical, if I'm being perfectly honest. But yeah, he didn't like Fernando's 10-second penalty, which was for working on the car. At the Saudi Arabia Grand Prix last year, and basically went and put the heavy hand on the shoulder of his homeboy, who was a VP for the Middle Eastern and North African chapter region, phrase that how you may, of the FIA, and said, yeah, this penalty shouldn't stand. And then, well, the penalty did not stand. At the time, it was being sort of couched in the language of being slightly unclear, because saying that, quotes, working on the cars didn't include jacking the car up, which I vehemently disagree with that, first of all. If you're in the pits to serve a penalty, no working on the car. My brain says that it's pretty goddamn clear that includes not jacking up the car to start working on it. I mean, am I stupid / off base? Because I really don't feel like I am.
Yeah, maybe it's because F1 doesn't. I don't know. I don't know actually how many motorsports series actually do this, but the pit lane penalty box. I know IMSA does that. So maybe I don't know. That's part of the reason why they don't, or why that's happening. Even though I don't know, because if you're in the pit lane penalty box, there's usually at the end of pit lane, like at the exit of it, that like you're there and you can't work on the car anyways because, well, the car is away from its actual pit. So I don't know. I don't
Yeah, I
know if
mean,
F1 would ever do anything like that, but
it would be great, but I mean, even in NASCAR, if you get held for whatever reason, you are held and you're usually in your box and you can't touch the car. Like, I don't know. And I guess before I go any further, I understand that part of Formula One. I mean, and it's been talked about time and time and time again. I mean, you have whole departments in the teams now that just exist to dissect the rule book, be it technical or sporting, and find loopholes. But it seems, like I said, it seems pretty clear to me that Fernando was in the pits for a 5-second penalty because I think seem to think it was track limits related. Um, then that means you're not touching the car to work on it. So don't jack up the car. But anyway, point being is that and that one I should point out is that was what the area that Ben Slam was exploiting was basically that. And so that was the language that it was couched in. Plus, Aston Martin, to be fair, did lodge a right to review. And so the penalty was overturned, and with clear language being added. I don't know what the current wording of that is, but it's worth noting. I mean, you can find the FIA sporting rule book. It's for Formula One. It's not that hard, and you would be looking at Article 54. You're looking at paragraph 3 and 4. If you're curious. Certainly at the time it was, while the car is stationary in the pit lane as a result of incurring a penalty in accordance with the aforementioned article sections, it may not be worked on until the car has been stationary for the duration of the penalty. Like I said, it seems pretty clear cut to me, but clearly I'm dumb and wrong and don't know what I'm talking about. But but point being is that there was a bit of contravention of the rules from the governing body. Like I said, a whistleblower sounded the alarm on this this morning, actually, as of the time of recording. And like I said, it's wild because it's just another black eye for the governing body of the sport. The FIA and Mohammed specifically have been embroiled in nonsense nonstop for what feels like the last 3 years at this point. It feels like basically since taking over, I guess that would have been like 2020, 2021. It feels like it has been something. And I don't know what well, actually, that's not true. It requires a vote of no confidence. Pardon me, which we've had before because Max Mosley almost got ousted after that weird fashy sex party thing that he had in 2007, 2008. And he very nearly saw himself ousted from the presidency of the FIA. But like, how much longer are we going to keep doing this until somebody somewhere finally says enough is enough? I mean, I don't know. But like I said, it's just another useless black eye for the sport. But the biggest meat on all of this is the plot continuing to thicken. It's practically molasses at this point with the thing with Red Bull and Christian Horner. So, and I reported on this in a solo episode. Feels like about a month ago at this point. Christian Horner was, at the beginning of February, Christian Horner was under investigation for some unsavory behavior, towards a female colleague within the Red Bull Racing organization. It's worth noting kind of the scope and what have you of the accusations did shift a bit sort of through that period, but it's worth noting that, Red Bull, Formula One, kind of the sport broadly, were keeping a pretty tight lid on that. And then the fact that this was being undergone by an independent barrister means that, certainly the game that can be telephone rumor within F1, that wasn't super surprising. However, I guess it would have been middle of last week. I think it was Wednesday was when the case was the investigation. It was dismissed. Now, it's worth noting that that is not the same thing as being cleared of wrongdoing, but merely that, the barrister or whoever felt like there wasn't, at least wasn't enough to go forward. Well, less than 24 hours after that, more than 100 F1 accredited journalists were blasted a Google Drive folder full of alleged evidence. Now, of course, it's worth noting that there has not been anything concrete. Nobody has confirmed that that folder is legit. Now, granted, nobody's going out of their way to say that it's bunk either, but it will stand firm as alleged until somebody says something. But it's hard to understate or overstate rather, the sort of ripple effect that has had within the sport. After Red Bull won the Grand Prix, Horner was reportedly summoned to see our wonderful protagonist, Mohammed bin Sulayem, about it. The contents of the meeting remain tight-lipped, so we don't know what. It is reported that it was effectively Horner pleading his case and why he should stay as head of or team principal of Red Bull Racing. But there is growing discontent. Toto Wolff and Zach Brown have already stated certainly their discontent over the investigation and the way that it kind of looms over F1 as a whole, and also they're feeling that something should be done about it one way or another. But it's also worth noting that those two men are probably Christian Horner's biggest ops, so it's worth taking even those statements kind of with a grain of salt. Grains of salt that are the size of the moon. But yeah, it's kind of wild. And certainly in the last couple of days, there has been some increasing chatter. Elizabeth Blackstock, who is a fabulous journalist and probably about the only one I trust to just not make shit up, reported on Jalopnik day before yesterday that the current Red Bull CEO, Oliver Mentzlav, I do believe I've pronounced that correctly, was apparently ready to fire Horner into the sun when the allegations broke beginning of last month. However, apparently Horner didn't accept the termination and threatened to file an injunction with London High Courts if he was terminated anyway before an investigation could get underway. And additionally, there's some additional chatter from the likes of like Business Insider and BBC Sport and what have you, that there seem to be some shareholders within the Red Bull organization that seem to be really backing Horner, and that also seems to have Mentzlav a bit strung up. Now, before I go any further, it's worth noting that Jos Verstappen is many things. A reliable narrator is absolutely not one of them. That man has his own checkered past with sort of his treatment of, well, really anybody, if I'm being perfectly honest. But he's been sounding the alarm, something fierce here this last about 72 hours. Even going so far as to say that, Christian Horner is playing victim when he isn't and is driving the team apart. Now, it's worth noting this could all be very well a calculated PR move. Again, like I said, Jos is unreliable at best.
Yeah, he could just be doing, for all intents and purposes, he could just be doing this or saying all this just because he is highly invested in Max and Max being an F1. So, for all we know, this could be some self-serving thing for him because Red Bull falling apart would mean Max would everybody would be a mass exodus. So, and that's again his dream of shoehorning Max into F1 and nothing else would collapse.
Exactly. And I'm glad you said that, because, and this was the thing that I didn't realize until further reporting on it has been done really within these last couple of weeks. Like, everybody has escape clauses in their contracts that can be triggered with immediate effect if like one guy leaves or gets fired. If Christian gets sacked, then Newey can leave. If Marco decides to go, which the rumors are strengthening that he might as a result of all of this, then Verstappen can bugger off whenever he chooses to. And then it's like vice versa. It's like, how on earth did you all structure these contracts where basically it's like if one guy leaves, then it's a chain of departure of senior staff within Red Bull? Like, who on God's green earth thought that that was an intelligent idea? And I guess, granted, all of this is predicated around not this happening, but that is still wild to me that it's like nobody within that organization, certainly not in any sort of senior capacity, is locked down. I don't know. It's wild. But and speaking of people attempting to unwind things, rumor mill coming out of Dearborn, so I guess just a stone's throw up the road from me, that Ford is very not down with any of what's happening and are currently looking at unwinding the effectively long-term, I guess, kind of engineering / powertrain partnership that they have with Red Bull. And that's big because that is Red Bull's effectively engine partner in Formula One starting in 2026, I think. Yeah, basically in 2026, I think, is when they're going to be taking over as the engine partner, and they'll be basically working alongside Red Bull powertrains technologies to create a fresh power unit as opposed to the basically Honda developed but sort of Red Bull maintained / updated unit that they've basically been using since 2021, or the basis of which rather. And and I talked about it a little bit on Twitter. It's worth noting that a lot of this is sort of speculative. However, if I think that there is a real domino that will fall, it's this. And it's the thing with Ford. We've talked about it before. Ford generally as an organization is fairly risk averse. And so this is a PR nightmare. I mean, I talked about it in my little update in post last episode. The Transit Supervan, the 4.2, that's got Red Bull stuff plastered all over the side of it. So, in addition to being, an engineering partnership, it's branding as well, branding on both sides, Ford for Red Bull for Ford. And yeah, so they aren't going to want any parts of this at all. And I know that they're taking their discussions happening at One Ford Way right now on how detrimental is that going to be to the Ford brand. But also, Ford's corporate culture doesn't really seem to support this. Raj Nair, he was the executive vice president of North American operations. So he was quite a ways up the Ford food chain. He got busted it was late February 2018. Well, at least that was when it broke. Who knows how long the investigation internally had been going. But it was February 21st or 22nd, 2018. He was fired by Ford for doing the exact same thing that Christian Horner has allegedly been doing. So Ford isn't really down with this kind of thing, or at least that is the precedent that they have set. Now, certainly, Jim Farley went on record at the Daytona 500, I do believe, and said that they had sort of tapped Red Bull's shoulders and asked them to basically sort this out, because he was talked to by a few NASCAR media, and they kind of wound up on that topic. So certainly Ford is watching this closely to sort of figure out a resolution, and we really don't seem to be any closer to one than we were, a month ago. And additionally, I know that the barrister, of which we don't know who, but I know has come under some fire, basically trying to figure out how did we arrive at, basically case dismissed, especially if that Google Drive folder is legit, because then they basically had all the evidence that they needed right in front of them, ostensibly, and then didn't do anything. And I guess one final thing before we sort of shuffle this out, you know, understand that the internet was a bit annoyed about the outcome. And somebody probably thought they were trying to do the right thing. However, in doing so, as in the result of the documents being buckshot across the internet, is that the unfortunate bit is that this young woman was doxxed in the process of this. And like, I can't begin to state, through her effectively trying to go through the correct channels and have all of this done properly, her life has effectively been turned upside down. And this is going to potentially ruin her ability to work in this industry and in motorsports broadly going forward. And just is, and frankly, well, let me point out, doxing is, never good, whether intentional or not. But certainly if you're in a position that you have access to that kind of data and you feel like justice has not been served, which is worth noting that is a purely subjective barometer, but that's a can of worms for a different day. Make sure that any sensitive information regarding the other person is going to be scrubbed first, because her life, I mean, it's profoundly shitty how bad her life has gotten as a direct result of basically a bit of internet vigilantism. So just do better, folks. But I sort of guess with that, we can kind of close out the episode. Next up on the docket is the 1812 of Qatar, and then certainly after that, IndyCar will be back with St. Pete, and certainly there are further developments sort of on charters and things and weirdness going on there, so we will probably cover that then. But I guess before we kind of have before I have the wonderful tune that I made and have been teasing on socials take us away, am I missing anything before we close out?
And not really. I just wanted to add though, some of the response that I've seen from the Christian Horner situation from some people, notably on Twitter, is just very disgusting. It's mainly men. I'm just gonna not sugarcoat or anything.
Yeah.
And they're basically just using it as an opportunity to dunk and punch down on women, since the case was dismissed. And it's the case being dismissed is essentially, like you said, it's pretty much the same thing as being dealt a not guilty verdict in court. It doesn't mean that the defendant is innocent. It just means that there wasn't sufficient enough evidence presented by the prosecution to say that they either did do it or didn't do it. So it's not for all intents and purposes, he could have been guilty of all the stuff that he did. And then even some dude that I remember seeing one of his tweets where he was all basically saying all this bullshit about take that woke feminists and stuff like that. It's using this situation as fuel for your bullshit culture war is just insane to me. It's just fucking insane, and it's just crazy that people are even doing that. The whole thing just it just reeks of just flat out misogyny and sexism. It's yeah, let me just go ahead and use this as an opportunity to dunk on women, punch down on them, and basically further cement the hatred and disdain that I have for women. No. I mean, I can't say that I'm surprised, because I'm not, because that's usually what happens a lot of times in these cases. It's just people fly off the handle, and they're all like, see, this is why we can't believe anybody who, is putting forth any of these, claims or whatnot. And it's like, no.
Yeah, exactly. And that and that was I was looking at something. It was funny enough, completely unrelated recently. Actually, it was a mutual of mine on Twitter, the Oshri Cami at Afrocentripetal. Um, and was actually talking about sort of a similar phenomena within kind of anime circles and kind of basically weeb circles, kind of doing the exact same thing. And I talked about it. I don't think I've watched a piece of anime except for when certainly not in the last more than 10 years at this point. I think last time I would have been with my sister when she was kind of little and starting to get into that stuff. But it's the same thing. It's like you get women in these hobbies and then you accuse them of being pick me and whatever and blah blah blah. And yes, you use it as a launching point for this nonsense left v right, woke v not, culture war nonsense. And it's just like that's not really, in this instance, it's not really the point. But even just broadly speaking, um it well, I think it completely serves to undermine a lot of these arguments. It's like that's not what we were talking about here. And it also explains why you get the complete and utter vacuum of diversity. And people talk about it, and part of the reason why the drum gets beaten so much for this stuff is because I can't tell you how many people, how many young women have looked at this situation. They could be the next, frankly, could be the next Adrian Newey possibly. But they're like, okay, if something happens, then I'm, completely SOL, and then there's no recourse. And then I possibly might get doxxed by somebody who's attempting to do the right thing, but has gone about it in completely the wrong manner. And it creates this real vacuum of just bright people, frankly, who are more than capable of doing these jobs. We talk about it a lot on the main NASCAR pod, but like it's, we say then, the next, Richard Petty, Jimmy Johnson, Chad Knaus, so in this case, the next, Lewis Hamilton, Adrian Newey, you know, I guess, Jean Todt, if we want to pick a team principal, I don't know. They all kind of suck. So that one's a little harder, but, could be out there, but sees all this is like, absolutely not. And that's really, I think, in some ways is the big loser. But, we really do. There's a lot of work to be done. All of this really just further reinforces that there's a lot of work to be done in making these safe, frankly, like safe and inviting places for anybody, who's not, well, frankly, white men. And the responses on socials, I think, are more indicative of that even than the complete butchering of whatever this investigation was supposed to have been. But at any rate, we're getting into a very, very different podcast. So with that, see you soon for Qatar. And then after that, we will be back for St. Pete. Until next time, folks.